La séance est ouverte.
I'd like to resume the sitting. The first item on the agenda is the second round of voting for the election of the Commission of Human Rights in the Council of Europe. A relative majority is required for this round of voting.
La liste des candidats et leur notice biographique figure dans le
The list of candidates,
14
together with their
L'avis de la sous-commission des droits de l'homme
CVs, is in the document 1444.
dans le document 14-455.
And the document 1445 actually sets out the list in Addendum 2. The voting will take place in the rotundum area in front of the Presidency. Voting will be suspended at 1, it will reopen at 3:30 and will close at 5. As usual, counting will then take place under the supervision of 4 tellers, and we will be drawing their names out of a hat.
Alors, le numéro 357. Monsieur Bertrand Sort, pardon.
Bertrand Sort.
C'est un homme, une dame. 77, Madame Pachayeva.
Ms. Pachayeva.
63. Monsieur Kobza.
Mr. Kobza.
119. 119. Monsieur Destrebec.
Mr. Distrebec.
Donc, à nos 4 scrutateurs, je leur rappelle qu'ils
So we now have the 4 tellers. I would like to remind you that you should meet in the rotundum area behind the Presidency at 5 p.m. We will do our best to ensure that the results of the vote are announced before the end of business this afternoon. Voting is now open. We will continue business during the ballot.
Oui. Non. Alors, modification dans la composition des commissions. C'est ça? Oui. Modification dans la composition des commissions. Des propositions de modification.
Changes to the composition of committees. Proposals to change the composition of committees were published in the document 01A4. I would like to know whether there are any objections to those suggested changes.
Elles sont donc adoptées.
So they are adopted in that case.
L'ordre du jour appelle le débat conjoint.
The next item on the agenda is a joint debate. We'll start with the presentation by Mr. Jensen on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. The title of his report is Working Towards a Framework for Modern Sports Governance. Next, Anne Brasseur will be talking about good football governance on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. I would remind you that on Monday morning, the Assembly decided to limit speaking time to 3 minutes per speaker. We should complete our debate, including the vote, by 12. As a result, I will be interrupting the list of speakers at around 11:45 so as to ensure that we have time for the response from the rapporteurs. I would remind you that each of the rapporteurs have a total of 30 minutes of speaking time, which they may divide between presentation of the report and reply to the debate. The first speaker is Mr. Mogens Jensen, rapporteur for the Culture Committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, last weekend we were all spectators of sport diplomacy, bringing conflicting nations together for the sake of the Olympic ethos when it comes to North and South Korea. Yet it is still too early for the IOC to claim the Nobel Prize for Peace, at least not until it has set its own house in order. Almost daily, we have new scandals breaking out: bribery and corruption, state-sponsored doping, match fixing and illegal betting. The crisis of trust is such that we often hear it say sport is corrupt. But that's wrong, because sport itself is pure and presents a platform for great positive change if in the right hands. So also the organisations, also the hands have to be pure. Structurally, most sports governing organisations continue to be run on archaic business models with little inbuilt checks and balances, transparency or accountability. At the end of 2015, the Danish Research Centre Play the Game published a critical report, The Legitimacy Crisis of International Sports Governments, in which was the one that also triggered my report. It estimated that 75% of the 35 international Olympic federations did not fulfill even half the governance criteria they were expected to. And now, 2 years on, we may ask, has anything really changed? And the reply is here both yes and no. From the positive side, albeit under pressure, several international sports federations have reacted by introducing stricter regulatory frameworks. I should commend football, cycling and athletics in this context. There's also a stronger awareness that the sports landscape is changing and that, despite the notorious claim on sports autonomy, the sports movement is not to solve its problem of integrity and governance alone. And yet, the sports movement is still very slow to modernise its functioning. Its failures are systematic and they call for a major overhaul of sports governance structures and practices. And what needs to be done? My report focuses on 3 pillars. First, the basic understanding of what governance sports organisations, from the small clubs to mega international federations that represent big business, actually contains. We have to have harmonised criteria. Secondly, the actions and common tools that are needed to put in place for good governance. And thirdly, moving forward through inclusive action and policies involving many different stakeholders. Let me immediately underline that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for sports governance. However, common basic criteria of good governance should apply to all organisations. These basic criteria significantly overlap with the governance principles applied in the corporate, the public and non-profit sectors. Implementation of them is no rocket science, it's just common sense. Restoring public trust in sports begins with ending impunity and bringing those responsible for crimes to justice. The sports movement itself needs to be proactive in indictment where allegations emerge, but it should also introduce robust regulatory safeguards that would help root out corruption and really base on transparency and accountability. Here also national governments have a crucial role to play in implementing existing international conventions or national anti-corruption and anti-discrimination laws, or by introducing new legislation allowing proper investigation and mutual legal assistance with police and judicial organs, prosecution of private corruption in sports, and so on. As we have both underlined, with also in an ambassador's report on so many occasions, sports should no longer remain a lawless zone. From the outset of my report, I have constantly underscored the need to agree on a common set of criteria or benchmark of standards, whichever term we use, encompassing shared principles and concrete measures how to achieve them. A number of sports governing bodies have established their own codes and standards. While largely consistent with one another, they all remain individual sets of standards which do not provide a common basis upon which we build effective international compliance assessment and cooperation. That is possible to do with a study that has been carried out through the work of my report has been carried out, which is also now we asked to add for an addendum for my report. There you can see that it will be actually possible to harmonise, to have common global standards of good governance of sport. And this could also be used for at least 3 initiatives. First, by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to update its own basic universal principles, and I was very happy in a conversation with the IOC compliance officer on Monday to hear that this update was now being prepared. Second, at the European level, elaborating a new Council of Europe Convention on Good Governance in Sport. This new convention could complement the existing conventional basis of the Council of Europe in sport and enable a monitoring of their implementation. And third, on global level, I still very much hold that we need to bring the discussion on the common governance standards outside the sport movement proper and open a multi-stakeholder discussion on these standards through the ISO certification process. The great advantage of an ISO certification is its legitimacy. ISO standards are truly universal and their content is not contested. They often encourage but do not require changing national legislation, which is often a major obstacle to get an agreement or convention adopted. The overall harmonisation of standards goes hand in hand with the introduction of a proper monitoring and compliance assessment system of the implementation of the standards. Up until 2015, the sports movement at large was out of any scrutiny or assessment as regards the implementation of any of the codes or standards or principles. And the models used today do not allow for early detection of possible corruption. And that's why the scandals emerge now actually date back quite some time, and they mostly surface thanks to some brave whistleblower. And here's where I propose my kind of smartphone solution to set up an independent sports ethic rating system. Rating offers a solution that is similar to the ISO standardization scheme in terms of being voluntary, elaborated through the involvement of key stakeholders, assessed by fully independent private service providers, and results of the assessment would belong entirely to the organisation or federation assessed. Of course, the question arises who should be responsible for harmonisation or standards and introducing monitoring and compliance assessment. And here we come back to the lack of strong leadership in the sports movement today. At the same time, there is a clear move towards involving new stakeholders, from sponsors to the youth in sports and policy making, and notably the new stakeholder platforms and alliances that are looking to take lead in seeking global solutions. Finally, while preparing this report, I realised that apart from some sporadic reports here and there is no parliamentary dimension at all today in the debate on sports integrity and sports governance. Yet national parliaments are those that should adopt quite some legislation in order to make national corruption laws applicable to sport. And I therefore also suggest that it's pertinent for this Assembly to set up a parliamentary alliance for good governance and integrity in sport, which I would be happy also to introduce to all of you. So, all in all, there is a path forward, and where there is a will, it's also possible to obtain results when it comes to introducing better good governance in sport. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you, colleagues.
Merci, Monsieur le rapporteur.
Thank you, Rapporteur. You will have 2 minutes afterwards to provide answers to questions during the debate. Before handing over to Ms. Brasser, I have a very important announcement to make. As you might know, Ms. Anne Brasser announced recently that she won't be running for the next parliamentary elections in Luxembourg. This means that after 20 years as a member of our Assembly, Anne Brasser will be soon bidding us farewell. Anne Brasser arrived in the Parliamentary Assembly for the first time back in 1993. Over her long career in this House, she's prepared a whole series of reports and opinions addressing issues ranging from the fight against intolerance, the religious dimension of intercultural dialogue, and the political transition in Tunisia, to mention just a few. Over the years, she has also held practically all important posts in the Assembly: President of Delegation, Chairman of Committee, Head of Political Group, followed by a period between 2014 and 2016 in which she held the most important and prestigious office in the House, President of the Assembly. Dear Anne, this is the last report which you'll be presenting here in the Assembly. I would like to take this opportunity to extend our heartfelt gratitude and wishes to you, thanking you for everything you've done and for everything you've achieved in your many years in the Assembly. And in particular, I'd like to thank you for being who and what you are: a convinced European, an untiring defender of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. Above all, you have always been a wonderful colleague and friend to all of us.
Chère Anne, vous avez la parole.
Dear Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, I'm embarrassed by your very kind words, but I hope that this won't be taken out of my speaking time, because this is not my last part session. I'll be back in April to say goodbye. Today, I'm here to deliver my last report, and it's a particularly important issue. So I'll be giving my farewell speech in April. But those words touch me deeply. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, too much money harms football. Well, let me start again. I'm so embarrassed. I wasn't expecting such a eulogy. Too little money harms football. Too much is killing it. We need to prevent football from self-destruction. These are the first words in the draft resolution which you are to vote upon. Since football belongs to no one or no particular organisation, but rather belongs to everyone, that is all of us, it is something which should be viewed as a common good, and football cannot escape common law. And my colleague Mr. Jensen has said there can be no areas where the law is absent. Football is more than just scoring goals, winning matches and trophies. Sport in general must be predicated upon principles and values, and football, as a universal sport, is duty-bound to convey those values. And so the footballers and those who head the sport must be above all suspicion, which is far from being the case. It is the credibility of this universal sport which is at stake. And then together with the football bodies, I stress together, we must put an end to this tendency to conceal, trivialize, and even deny excesses such as match fixing, doping, discrimination based on gender, homophobia, sexual harassment, xenophobia, racism, corruption, embezzlement, money laundering, tax avoidance, and dubious connections between the world of football, politics, and the economy. Yes, it's a long list. So we are duty-bound here, colleagues, to continue to demand that sport in general, as described in the outstanding report of my colleague Mr. Jensen, and football in particular, should be subjected to independent external oversight, not just to be in line with the law, but also to restore the credibility which sports people and spectators expect. That is why I suggest we look at the feasibility of establishing with all the stakeholders an independent observatory or monitoring centre to examine the governance of football bodies. Far be it for me to wish to tamper with the independence of sport. It will always be for the sports bodies to determine the rules of the game, the size of the pitch, or the duration of games, or video assistant refereeing. But when we're talking about commercial issues, financial rules, ethics, human rights, football must be subjected to the rule of law. That is the rules which apply to all. The draft resolution calls for a clear-cut distinction between commercial activities and the sports organizations per se. We should also think together about financial excess. For me, a player cannot be considered as a commodity with pecuniary value. This makes me think and smacks of slavery. We need to put an end to the financial excesses which lead to an explosion in transfer fees for players, as well as agents' fees and the salaries of players. Even if it's an outstanding player like Lionel Messi, who, according to the media, has an annual income of 100 million euros, followed by Cristiano Ronaldo with 39.5 million, and Neymar just a little less than this. They may be outstanding players, but these are dizzying figures which bear no relationship with reality, and they are disproportionate vis-à-vis other players. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, ever since the adoption of our last resolution in 2015 on football governance, a lot of progress has been made. We should acknowledge this and congratulate those in charge in FIFA and UEFA for this. We note progress in terms of protection of human rights, protection of minors, protection of women, the fight against hate speech. The full implementation of these reforms, however, remains a real challenge. So, yes, when it comes to procedures, we are seeing progress. But in practice, huge progress still remains to be done. As I've not been in a position to cover all the issues, I've drafted a new proposal on football governance and ethics, business or values, with a question mark, in which I ask for other related issues to be analysed, such as whether the clubs are clean with the debts, merchandising, match fixing, sales of tickets, and the various other aspects which the public authorities contribute to, including taxpayers. The effort made by the public authorities only seems to benefit a small circle of privileged people. We need to look at the dangerous, unhealthy links which may be established between sport, the business world, and politics. We also need to address the issue of how we can reduce inequalities between players, clubs, national federations and leagues, so that financial fair play is not an empty shell. I wish to alert you to the fact that in addition to my report, I've also established drawn up two notes, two memoranda on FIFA and on UEFA, respectively. They're public, they're published on the website of our Assembly, and you may read them so that you have a demonstration of the structures of these football federations and what progress has been made by them ever since our last resolution. And before concluding this brief introduction, I would like to thank all of those who've allowed me better to understand the complex nuts and bolts and sometimes opaque workings of the football world. The heads of FIFA and UEFA, external experts, journalists, experts on the Council of Europe, such as the partial agreement, the enlarged partial agreement on sport, and the European Commission should all be thanked, and I should not fail to express my warmest thanks to Mr. Roberto Fassino, the head of the Secretariat of the Culture Committee. This report is not drafted against or geared against football. On the contrary, together we must do our level best to prevent the killing of the hen that lays the golden eggs, or the golden ball, the Ballon d'Or. Thank you.
Merci. Merci, Madame la rapporteure.
Thank you, Rapporteur. You'll have 5 minutes left afterwards to answer questions.
Dans la discussion générale, la parole est désormais
Moving on now to the general debate.
Sikoudios.
Our first speaker is Mr. Sikoudios of the GUE group. Is he with us? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the rapporteurs for their work. Dear colleagues, sport and exercise are an integral part of life for millions of people worldwide. For us in the UEL group, sports and especially football must be seen under the light of the social needs. In other words, access to proper sport facilities and sport activities constitute a basic social right, and in this context we should consider that ground roots football and ground roots sports should be guaranteed by all the member states. Sports ensures major ethics, solidarity, team spirit, fair play, and many of the human rights like human dignity, diversity and non-discrimination. Those elements are not only precious during sport activities, but they can also educate youngsters, different societal groups, learn them how to share and how to behave democratically in their everyday lives. Sport can also be the key for the integration of migrants and refugees, as it promotes cooperation, dialogue and energetic participation. However, phenomena like some of them was referred to the reports, like doping or illegal betting and manipulation of sports results, violence and racist speech, trafficking through sports, corruption, cases of tax evasion and others have a negative impact on sports. It is to be noted that progress has been made, among other things, to the systems of governance and the composition of the relevant committees and judiciary bodies in FIFA and UEFA, and their commitment in combating discrimination and promoting mutual tolerance and respect, gender equality policies and social responsibility programmes, not to mention the human rights advisory body constituted there. However, a number of problems remain. Furthermore, we also welcome the progress made by FIFA and UEFA, including criteria that are set to the protection of human rights in the processes of choosing the host countries for major events, in line with our resolution here, the Council of Europe's Assembly Resolution 2053-2015 on the reform of football governance. More concretely, the specific initiatives taken to the monitoring and improving the working conditions at the construction site at the World Cup in Russia 2018 and 2022. However, FIFA should continue its endeavours to consolidate those improvements in these two countries as this is necessary, and ensure that the benefits of the workers, and not only those employed in the construction, but all the workers, should be guaranteed. To conclude with, we also need to respect the local communities, local economies and local products when hosting major events. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. Je rappelle
Thank you very much. May I remind you that speaking time is 3 minutes, and I give the floor to Mr. Zavali from the FDG Group.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Free Democrat Group, I would like to share with you some ideas regarding the question of the need for a more modern governance structure for the world of sport. There's no doubt that football, something I'm very passionate about, and sport in general, belong to all citizens. And as a result, they cannot be exempt from laws. We've had a series of scandals including doping, illegal bets, match fixing and corruption affecting sport. And all these scandals have created an atmosphere of distrust and have driven many fans away from sport. If we are to restore trust and credibility in sport, enabling sport to transmit values, integrity and responsibility, we need mechanisms to help safeguard those values while at the same time bringing about a fundamental social change. To do this, we have to ensure that compliance systems are made increasingly binding in the world of sport. It would be useful to introduce codes of ethics accompanied by modern governance structures, setting out the fundamental principles which would define the powers of the various different sport bodies. Violation of rules could also expose those responsible to criminal prosecution. We need to ensure that we can establish a set of basic principles for good governance which would apply to all sports bodies, from the smallest right up to the largest. We need efforts across the board. The world of sport, with its athletes and players, coaching staff and managers, has to continue to be a model for many people in society, ranging from the youngest to the oldest. And whenever they make big mistakes, they cause enormous damage. This is why we have to help try to find solutions, establishing common foundations for fair sporting values, which would ensure that sport continues to promote the fundamental values which extend to the whole of society.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mrs. Hovhannisyan for the EPP Group.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to congratulate rapporteurs, Madame Brassot and Mr. Jensen, for their hard work they have done. Really, congratulations, and we support reports. And the subject is, in fact, of a topical interest. It is not secret that the amount of funds invested in football worldwide is increasing every day due to the growing interest towards football. Moreover, new businessmen and organizations with huge financial resources invest in global football with a view to increasing their revenues in this new market. It is undoubtedly true that nowadays football is more than a game or an entertainment option. It is a promising business direction, the evidence of which is an increase in broadcasts, participation in various sporting events, the increase in competition between clubs, especially big clubs, rising of the sales of club shirts and emblems, etc. And this list is not exhaustive. The globalization of the football affects also the transfer market and the rising price for the players. At first glance, it may seem that there is no negative phenomenon, that a new business direction has emerged and developed in the global economy. However, commercialization of football creates a huge financial gap between big and small clubs. It is enough to note that big clubs can afford to pay 100 and more million euros for only one player, while smaller clubs cannot even plan to keep up to 5% of the big club's transfer budget to renew the team throughout the year. This means that smaller clubs have to be satisfied with the average players. Until recently, small clubs had opportunities to use such mechanisms as joint ownership over the players, so-called Italian model, leasing agreements, involvement of youth players of big clubs, etc. These measures not only are useful to small clubs, but also provide employment opportunities to new players as they get the chance to play in lower-ranking clubs. At the same time, they gain more skills, which raises their transfer price. As a result, these players play in bigger clubs and smaller clubs receive money and continue their activity. However, the aforementioned Italian model was abolished, which had negative impact on small clubs. Another negative impact, as you know, for medium and small clubs was introduced by the new fair play regulations. It should be borne in mind that efforts to make football business more transparent started in the 1980s and 1990s. However, not all the measures taken in this area have considered these differences between small and big clubs, high-level and lower-level players, and options for balancing their opportunities. Dear colleagues, again, I fully support the recommendations rapporteurs made, and I think we really should think what we have to do and what we can do in this area. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much.
La parole est à Monsieur Mavrotas.
I now give the floor to Mr. Mavrotas from the Socialist Group.
Thank you, Madam President. I will speak in Greek. Έχουμε σήμερα δύο πολύ σημαντικές εκθέσεις για το θέμα της αθλητικής διακυβέρνησης. Θα ξεκινήσω από την έκθεση της κυρίας.
Thank you. Today we have two very important reports on the subject of sports governance. Allow me to start off with the first report. It's that of Ms. Brassa on good football governance. Football, of course, not just a sport. Sport represents considerable financial interests, financial clout. And, of course, we have seen the excesses to which that has led. So I think we need to ensure a robust governance in the area of football. I think we have been familiar with cases of corruption. There's a lack of transparency, malpractice when it comes to the governance both in respect of FIFA and UEFA. So as the report suggests, I think we need to ensure greater transparency, accountability, ethical standards, and other aspects such as limiting the term of office of those who hold responsibility within FIFA and UEFA. So I think we need to support these proposals. I think they're very welcome indeed, but I think we need to continue with these efforts and ensure that these measures are implemented. Because the independence of the sports movement shouldn't equate with a lack of transparency. I think it's important to note that the report also mentions education and training and the personal development of young athletes, because, of course, life doesn't stop when you embark upon a sports career, or life doesn't stop at the age of 30 or 35. So the report broaches general human rights issues and the role that football can play when it comes to putting across messages in the areas of fight against racism, hate speech, equality irrespective of race, colour or religion. Now allow me to pass on to the report by Mr. Jensen, and that concerns sports federations or sports governance in general. Very often there are scandals that sully the image of athletics, for example, doping, corruption, match fixing. And of course we cannot accept this. Sports federations cannot be opaque institutions. There are notions such as transparency, accountability, that, well, perhaps we should be thinking in terms of some kind of ethical ranking, some kind of ethical standard. I think in that way we can promote better governance on the basis of a certain number of criteria. The report also talks about the Council of Europe and the role that the Council of Europe can play when it comes to modern sports governance. Ladies and gentlemen, sport is a very important human activity, but we have to ensure transparency, accountability, integrity. That's the triathlon when it comes to sports governance, and I'd like to congratulate Ms. Bresser and Mr. Jensen for these two important reports. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Kilic for the EC Group.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to congratulate the reporters for these two reports on such important issues. I find the problems pointed out in the two reports and the proposed solutions very crucial. Since I served as Minister of Youth and Sports of the Republic of Turkey for almost 4 years, I'm very much aware of the problems and dangers faced by football and sports in general. In many parts of the world, football is the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to sports. The reasons that football fascinates people can be attributed to many sociological, economic, psychological and political factors. Football, thanks to its nature, appeals to every segment of society. Unfortunately, as noted in the reports, today both football and sports in general are facing serious problems. The scandals that have emerged in recent years show that the giant sports sector is evolving to a point where only money matters and the real value of sports is deteriorating. Financial mismanagement, bribery and corruption allegations have become widespread in the international management of sports. This, coupled with the impunity culture, has caused serious allegations of mismanagement and doping to become dominant in some international sports federations. Also, the results in clean sports are not as to the standards as we would like to have, and the Council of Europe is also very active on this in international organizations regarding the fight against doping and also the support of clean sports, because also the allegations of misconduct by not only certain institutions and certain betting agencies, but also the athletes and also some other unfortunate people involved in this situation. At this point, I would like to emphasize that the proposals brought by both reporters to resolve the problems faced by sports, especially the proposals regarding supervision and ethical evaluation of sports management, are very valuable. Finally, for the future of sports, it is important to establish global good governance standards consisting of basic principles with the participation of all stakeholders. It is also essential to encourage national federations to adopt these good governance standards without interfering in their day-to-day runnings. With such a perspective, international federations should be guiding and coordinating national federations. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much. And to conclude the list of speakers on behalf of political groups, I now give the floor to Mr. Comte on behalf of the ALDE Group.
Merci, Madame la Présidente de séance.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, the reports that have been presented have to be set in a broader context, long-term efforts on behalf of the Council of Europe. A number of instruments have been produced by this organisation in the area of sport. When you talk about or think about match fixing or doping, so this is a logical continuation, if you like, as we now take up the issue of sports governance. And in sports as in politics, there are some common sort of qualities, perseverance and endurance. And they want to take up these issues. Sports, of course, is a crossroads between the public and the private spheres, and some aspects of sport require action on part of public authorities. I think we all want sport to play a positive role in society in the area of integration, promoting health, personal development, but I think we all know that sport sometimes has to protect itself against itself, and I think we have to help sport protect itself against itself, given the dangers that beset it. In her report, Madame Bresser said we shouldn't sort of confuse roles. Sports associations have to be fully independent and shoulder responsibility for introducing effective governance. There shouldn't be any political interference when it comes to the functioning of sport. sports organizations. I think the past has shown that when there is political interference, that can lead to major problems, conflicts of interest, corruption, institutionalized doping. So I think the remedy shouldn't be worse than the ill it sets out to cure. But I think sports organizations are not above the law. They have to be accountable and need to be organized in such a way as to limit a certain number of risks in the area of corruption, for example. And that's certainly true in that it's public authorities that very often allocate funds to sports organizations when it comes to the organization of major sports events, for example. I'd like to underscore the efforts already made by a certain number of sports organizations with a view to enhancing their own sports governance, but I think it is a process. It's a sort of long-term process, and further efforts are required. It's something like the labour of Sisyphus, if you like. When you've got rolled your stone up to the top of the hill, sometimes it rolls all the way down and you've got to start again from scratch. So I think these are long-term efforts, and I think we will have to concern ourselves with these issues for many years to come, but I think it is important that we continue the dialogue between public authorities and sports institutions with a view to enhancing governance and fight against corruption. It's not a sort of a tug-of-war or a tussle between public authorities and sports organizations, but rather I think we need to work hand in hand so that we can take up these challenges. And I think sports organizations indeed need us when it comes to bringing before court, bringing to book people who don't abide by the rules. So I say it's going to take time, but I think we need to pay tribute to the work that has been done here and commit ourselves to continue along this path. Thank you very much. Rapporteurs, you have the opportunity now of taking the floor in reaction to the statements made by speakers on behalf of political groups. No? In that case, we will continue with the general debate. And I call Mr. Frédéric Reiss from France.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, for many years now, we've been grappling with the issue of good governance in sport, and in football in particular. The behaviour of certain players on top of corruption scandals have given football a terrible image. As a former sportsman, I will set great store by the example sport could set to young people in particular, and sports people, leaders, as well as the governing bodies in sports competitions must all be irreproachable. Everybody has to do their bit in terms of shouldering responsibility and transmitting the values of solidarity, a sense of effort and equality and respect through sport, football in particular, as they are so helpful to young people. And these values will then be better championed in society. It's important we also have a balance between sporting excellence and true financial fair play. And these UEFA rules seem to have been forgotten in certain quarters. But we need to have healthy football and fair competition. The amounts involved in certain transfers, particularly in France, are obscene, particularly against a backdrop of a financial crisis, people having trouble making ends meet. And I think football is specific in this regard. I mean, how much does it cost to put together a team which is capable of winning the Champions League? And I don't think that sporting excellence should crush everything else. If money trumps everything, then that spells the end of our values. In the face of these excesses, we need to talk about corruption at higher levels. We need to be firmer in punishing all reprehensible acts. Now, we have rules for financial fair play. They now need to be applied. And those who are convicted of corruption should be sentenced. And players who are convicted of doping should receive exemplary sentences. The popularity of football is undeniable, and the sport now has to improve its image. Now, in a way, the pretty recent breakthrough of women's football has been salutary because, far from indulging in excesses, women's competitions show that football can be interesting and that it can stand for certain values. And I think it has the advantage of showing a public healthy football. And in that regard, we would salute the efforts of FIFA to promote women's football. I mean, I think we all remember the film Bend It Like Beckham, in which a young girl from an Indian background in Great Britain was able to fight against prejudice through football. And I think that sport shows that you can fight against discrimination, promote equality, causes which, after all, are the very heart of the Council of Europe. And congratulations, Madame Brosseau, on an excellent job of work.
Thank you. I give the floor to Lord Fox from the UK.
Two really excellent reports. I want to concentrate on the one on football governance. And I speak as a former chairman of a football club, my own club, the beautifully named Heart of Midlothian Football Club, based in Edinburgh. That club is transferring ownership to the fans through the Foundation of Hearts, where 8,500 fans are contributing between £10 and £500 a month each towards the maintenance of the club, as well as taking tickets, of course, for every match. And that's the way forward, I think, that ought to be for football clubs. And I've seen football governance close up as a result of that, and I think there are three problems that we have. First of all, as we've heard, football in each country think they're above the law, that they're separate from the governance of their own country. And that's not the case. They ought to be taking account of what governments in their own countries think and say and do. And in particular, this also happens at an international level. And I think we should condemn the pressure that FIFA has been putting on Anne Brasseur personally, and the misrepresentations that FIFA has been making about Anne's report. It is really quite disgraceful the way they have been operating, and we should be saying that. The second problem is, of course, money, and that has been referred to, not just in transfers, but of course in the ownership of clubs, which is making it increasingly difficult for fans. And this is the third point I want to make, is for fans ought to be much more involved. We are the lifeblood of all our football clubs. They would not exist. There would be no purpose for football without the fans. And yet the fans are not involved enough in most of the football clubs in Europe, and there must be a great deal more. So I think we should support this report wholeheartedly. Ask the Council and of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly to take it forward with enthusiasm. And we should thank Anne Brasseur for the report, but also thank her for her courage in standing up to the pressures that she's been facing.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Vinevisa from Liechtenstein, please.
Thank you, President. I would like to start by thanking our two rapporteurs for their reports, in particular for their very balanced introductory statements. In the light of what they said, I think we can look forward to a well-thought-through and balanced debate. We shouldn't forget that in the light of recent events, many sports organisations are now under enormous scrutiny in terms of governance. We all know what happened with FIFA, which triggered off a chain reaction throughout the sport. I'd like to focus on what Ms. Brasseur said. Clearly, she wants to achieve maximum impact with her sport. The events with FIFA have triggered off an enormous amount of unpredictable activity, and Mr. Jagland, the Secretary General, had a meeting with Mr. Infantino 2 weeks ago where he announced intense cooperation between FIFA and the Council of Europe. In the light of that, I'd like to thank Ms. Brasseur for the work she's done. The idea of a process of dialogue which won't simply preempt the results of this work is a good thing. However, we have to ensure that the debate addressing FIFA and other sport organisations be carried out in the Council of Europe. Ms. Brasseur's report should set out an interesting framework for this dialogue before we move up to higher levels. Following recent reports from the investigators into FIFA, Marc Pieter, an international criminal law expert, said that the FIFA reform process is now dead. FIFA worked between 2011 and 2013 for FIFA, and he was the front man for the reform process back then. Borbeli and Eckart worked from 2015 onwards, and they carried out more than 190 investigations, and more than 70 officials were summarily condemned. They also talked about the investigations regarding the further 100 dangerous cases, and they said that the FIFA reform process has been thrown back by years. Nicola Maduro, who was also responsible, recently qualified FIFA as a system without rules. FIFA is a worldwide organization. It can no longer be run like a small association based on the whims of those responsible. The stated intention to cooperate with the Council of Europe, which is to be welcomed, can't be just lip service to improved relations. We have to take this as an honest commitment. The Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly must follow closely events. We must ensure that FIFA doesn't just use the Council of Europe as a fig leaf while continuing to conduct business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Strasbourg from Romania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear members of the Assembly, I would like to thank our colleagues for their reports, which are both important and timely, coming as they do at a time when the good reputation of sports is under threat from scandals of corruption, foul play and harassment. Sports will always occupy, of course, a special place in people's hearts. For 2,500 years, since they first appeared in ancient Greece, until today, sports have been animated by the same values: individual excellence, team spirit, respect for the laws, and, of course, peace. These values transcend national borders, and it is an important point that sports organizations should retain a substantial degree of autonomy in order to best promote these values and hopefully act as a platform for sport diplomacy. Nevertheless, we cannot overlook the darkness aspects, which are described in detail by the reporters. The solution, as rightly pointed in the reports, is to raise the standard of governance in sport, focusing, of course, specifically on the principles of democracy, transparency and inclusiveness, seeking to represent all the interested stakeholders. Public authorities are certainly among the interested stakeholders and should be more assertive in demanding accountability and transparency. We should be fully aware that public assets are essential in the organisation of large-scale sporting events. Without substantial public investments in infrastructure, in subsidies and compliance calls, events such as international football championships should be not possible. In conclusion, dear colleagues, I think it is legitimate for the public to hold sport organisations accountable in the same way it holds accountable any other entity which makes use of taxpayers' money. Member States should engage in vigorous dialogue and ensure the democratisation and the upgrading of sports governance, as well as measures to increase transparency and accountability. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Ünal from Turkey.
Thank you, dear Chairperson. I am going to speak in Turkish. Sayın Başkan,
Distinguished Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank the two rapporteurs for the reports they have prepared. The rapporteurs mentioned the importance and the gravity of today's problems, and they have issued some recommendations. This was an important step to take. As someone from within sports, as a licensed football player who played for 16 years and who has observed referees, my observation is that recently doping, unfair play and bribery, corruption have been all discussed in sports recently, and therefore there's a diminishing interest in sports, especially in football. Of course, we need to understand that the bad governance of sports that does not provide for transparency and that enables immunities is very important. Recently, sports governance was regarded as above law, and the perpetrators of crimes did not have convictions. Therefore, we believe that sports management, sports governance standards play a very important role in today's era where the reputation of sports is tarnished. We believe that sports should no longer be governed in a way that is in conflict with modern ideas of governance. As pointed out in today's reports, we need to encompass international standards, modern standards, and that international organizations should set up standards, and all sports clubs must embrace these standards. Ladies and gentlemen, football is more than just a sport. This is an economic activity with an aim of maximize profits today. However, it's also an important part of the social life of individuals. It should not only be regarded only as an economic activity. At this point, Madam Rapporteur underlined the fact that too little money harms football, too much of it kills football, and I think that this is a very important statement to make. Unfortunately, this is due to the fact that football has not been governed well enough, and good governance standards, international standards, are required to solve this issue. Therefore, I do back the report that there should be good governance, that there should be diminishing or reduction of problems, and I welcome the recommendations of the rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Baroness Matthew from the UK.
Madam President, colleagues, good morning. I welcome these reports, and I commend their thoroughness. It is not easy to challenge institutional failings, and the rapporteurs are to be commended and congratulated on their courage in doing so. We would normally associate sport with positive values such as fair play, teamwork, health, well-being from grassroots to serious sports level. And I do believe that the majority of sportsmen and sportswomen live up to this image and provide good role models for young people. Sadly, in recent years, we've been faced with the tarnishing of the sports image. I make no excuse for repeating what other people have said. I think these concerns need repeating. Perhaps a title of a book on tennis corruption, Game, Set and Match Fix, says it all. We're now familiar with doping scandals, match fixing, betting irregularities, money laundering, bribery, sexual abuse, racism and so on. Better governance is called for in the two reports, and governance which should apply to all, from small clubs to the international scene. Standards need to be set, harmonised and monitored. We in the UK have been affected by the negative issues I mentioned earlier, with many notorious examples. Let me quote a response from the Sport England Code for Governance, published in April 2017. This calls for increased skills and diversity on boards with a target of at least 30% gender diversity. Greater transparency, such as publishing more information on the structure, strategy and financial position of the organisation. Constitutional arrangements which give boards the prime role in decision making. I am glad to see the Football Association has agreed a number of reforms, including the composition of boards. And I do hope that firm action on boards will encourage and result in a change of attitude amongst those involved in sports. Referees, players, club owners, companies and government, even spectators. This, I hope, will result in better examples of good conduct for young people to follow. and will achieve the ideals of our sportsmen and sportswomen, who inspire and thrill us in their activities. I'd like to be without the sordid attachment of corruption and bad behaviour. And again, I pay tribute to the rapporteurs for their courage in drawing attention to this important topic.
Je vous remercie. Monsieur Serzh,
Mr. Zaev, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Russian.
May I begin by thanking the rapporteurs for the huge amount of very important work they've done. At the same time, I think it's been clearly stated, and I support the idea that if sport is to be clean, then hands must be clean. And that is how we should understand this as the best way of supporting our sports people, our athletes, our footballers. They're not guilty of the fact of what's going on outside the football pitch. Football is the most popular sport around the world, and I think all of the people here and around the world are impatiently awaiting the greatest competition of all, which attracts the greatest interest. Football and sport are strongly supported in my country, and we'll all be delighted to say that for the first time in the history of football, an Azerbaijan team has got through to the next round of the Champions League. This is a team from Agdam who have impressed the whole world with the level of their football. And I think in future they will develop their football to an even higher level. But unfortunately, I have to point out that this club from Nagorno-Karabakh, from Agdam, was not able to host the teams from Italy, Spain and England in their local stadium. Agdam, to this very day, is still being occupied by Armenian forces. We hope that soon we'll all be able to ensure that that club can win many more competitions and host other teams in their own stadium. But I wish to express my congratulations to the rapporteurs above all. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Ms. McCarthy, please.
Thank you. I think these are both absolutely excellent reports. I want today, as a UK Member of Parliament, to focus on our national game, football, as many other speakers have done so today. I firstly just want to flag up in particular my support for the recommendation in Ms. Brashear's report that there needs to be urgent measures to protect construction workers in Qatar and not just those employed on the World Cup sites. I know there has been some improvements, but I think we want to do a lot more. Football truly is a global game, as we've seen from some of the contributions this morning, and this is evident nowhere more so than England's Premier League, which is watched by millions, if not billions, worldwide, even in some of the remotest parts of the globe. But the commercialisation of the so-called beautiful game does have its pitfalls, and I want to focus in particular on one example. It's surprising the reach that commercial deals and sponsorship now has. Manchester United, for example, has an official soft drink partner for China, an official isotonic drinks partner in Indonesia, and an official nutritional supplements partner for Japan, to name just a few. But I want today to talk about a deal struck by another giant of English football, Liverpool Football Club, and point out the need for greater vigilance when companies and clubs enter into these deals. In July last year, the club agreed a sponsorship deal with a Chinese company called Tibet Water Resources. Liverpool promised the Hong Kong-based entity, that it would, its Hong Kong listed entity, that it would benefit from a range of promotional rights, including digital media support and access to its footballing stars. There's been a boom in water bottling companies in Tibet, attracted by the source of some of Asia's largest rivers and the Tibetan glaciers, the so-called Third Pole. There is no suggestion that Tibet Water, which produces mineral water from a Tibetan glacier, has been directly involved in human rights abuses. However, groups such as Free Tibet and the Tibet Society have rightly expressed concern that the activities of Tibet Water are only possible due to China's unwelcome presence in the region. Tibet is now crisscrossed with mines being used to dig up natural resources, and yet the Tibetan people have been given no say at all about how their resources are used. Bottling water from Tibetan glaciers also exacerbates the existing threat already posed by climate change and pollution. Associating Tibet with major global brands like Liverpool FC allows the Chinese government to normalise its oppression of the Tibetan people, its destruction of Tibetan culture and its disregard for human rights. The findings and recommendations of Ms Brashear's report are to be welcomed, but I believe that going forward it is imperative that as football continues to get richer and richer, we ensure that the human rights of all, including Tibetans, do not suffer as a result of this growing commercialisation.
Je vous remercie. La parole est à Monsieur
Thank you. Mr. Vellini from France, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. I endorse much of what has been said, and I'd like to congratulate the two rapporteurs on their sterling job. I'd like to concentrate on 2 points. First of all, we must restore confidence and faith in the governing bodies of sport, which must be subject to much more stringent controls than those to date, and they must have effective oversight bodies which make it possible to prevent and punish offences, doping and corruption, for example. And a convention should be established in the Council of Europe to facilitate the fight against illegal activities in major federations such as UEFA or FIFA, and an ISO standard on sports governance seems to be an interesting idea. And public subsidy should be made contingent upon such certification. We've also seen indecent transfer fees, as the rapporteur said. In France, we have reached ever higher heights with Neymar, Mbappe. These transfer fees can't be borne, and they're completely acceptable. And going beyond the rules of financial fair play, which are insufficient, we need to think in terms of establishing a ceiling among our 47 countries. That would be a major step forward the Council of Europe would make if it were to take such an approach to introduce some morality in professional football. I think we should also envisage a percentage of that transfer fee being levied by our states in order to provide more funding for ODA, especially for children and women sports people in the countries of the South. Those are the 2 points I wish to contribute to this debate this morning. Thank you. Mr. Veki from Hungary, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, Hungary is committed to values such as hard work, honesty, tolerance, and loyalty. We agree that football, as one of the most popular sports in the world, must be based on the principles of fair play, mutual respect, and tolerance, and with this in mind, all persons involved in football, players, coaches, fans, and organizations, local, national, and international, should carry the good example. At the same time, the measure is mentioned by FIFA, and their impact should be thoroughly investigated and, in justified cases, be presented in detail in the report. We welcome the conclusion of the planned FIFA contra Council of Europe cooperation agreement. The agreement between the two bodies and joint work is seen as a major step forward in the enforcement of the human rights in sport. Today, the purity of sports endangered, among other things, by the increasingly fierce market competition, the lack of good governance mechanism, betting, fraud, and doping. These challenges can be only handled with the respect of the autonomy of the sports movement in close cooperation with sports organizations and sports stakeholders. As a result of the international betting activity, the illicit influencing of sports competitions is one of the most pressing challenges for 21st century sport. For Hungary, we believe that the Council of Europe Convention of the prohibited influencing of sports competitions, as well as the professional cooperation within this framework, can be an effective means of preventing and sanctioning international illegal activities. Hungary has signed the convention and is committed to its ratification. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. La parole est à Monsieur Golub d'Ukraine.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. De nos jours, compte tenu de l'antagonisme de certains
Madam President, I think today very often people engage in sport for political or lucrative ends, and I think the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe needs to pay particular attention to the current state of affairs when it comes to the management of various sports events hosted in different locations around the world. We need to ensure that sports governance abides by the principle of transparency, and I think the victory over corruption when it comes to sports management or governments, which become a crucial issue, depends on our willingness to fight against this shameful practice. But I think we're forced to note that not all countries have opted for transparency as the driving force in their evaluations of sports governance. And that's detrimental to sport and politics. Now, 2018, we see the Football World Cup being held, and it was decided that the event be hosted in Russia, but so many of the sportsmen have been banned from international sports competitions as a result of the recourse to corrupt methods, sort of disguised covert methods in order to win at sports events, doping, for example, which has affected a certain number of sports federations in Russia. And that's why I think we should appeal to decision-making bodies to deprive Russia of the ability to host the 2018 World Cup. Russia uses sport in international politics in order to attain its own ambitious and illegal ends, trampling underfoot a certain number of human rights. After the Olympic Games 2014 in Sochi, the Kremlin unleashed its aggression against my own country, annexing Crimea and starting a war in the Donbass with a view to pursuing its geopolitical ends. But using sport to put across the image of Putin as a sort of a victor, enabling it to empower its weaker neighbour, the Crimea. So I think sports has become an important phenomenon in this globally interdependent world, and I think we need therefore to concentrate on establishing norms, standards, ethical standards in the field of sport. We should be encouraging non-corrupt practices throughout sport. And sports organisations or federations need to concentrate on effective systems for introducing strategies that will make it possible to attract more people into the world of sport and ensure a future for sport, appealing to young children, but making it important access in the development of public policies at level of the state.
Thanks. Next is Mr. Müller from Switzerland. Thank you.
Geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
colleagues, first of all, I should like to disclose my relationship to football, because I was a president of the St. Gallen football club, which, along with Le Havre, is the oldest football club in Europe, and I was also a FIFA official at local matches, charged with enforcing the rules of the pitch. So, with that disclosure, I would like to address 3 points in the FIFA report. First of all, this is the fourth Council of Europe report on FIFA, and the fifth is already in the pipeline. But in actual fact, FIFA is a global sporting organisation, and so the view of European institutions and indeed European law are not alone decisive in this regard, because the views of other supranational organisations in Africa, Asia, South America and Oceania, for example, could claim an equal degree of validity. Secondly, I'd like us perhaps to look at the quality of Council of Europe reports, because the Parliamentary Assembly can only vote on draft resolutions, and the text of the explanatory memorandum remains unchanged. And this is particularly worrying here, because there are a number of really robust facts missing from the explanatory text. Now, nobody would deny there's a problem at the level of the Executive Committee of FIFA, but there are many assumptions made or assertions on the basis of tendentious media reports, and the words apparently, and it would appear, are littered through the text, and there is no real proper attribution or sourcing of information, and I think that calls into question the reliability of the report. Now, FIFA gets off fairly lightly in the Jensen report, because in actual fact in Appendix 1 FIFA is the best in class, at more points than the Council of Europe. So that being the case, how can the Council of Europe come up with the idea of placing FIFA under international political oversight or tutelage? There are contradictions in the Brasser and Jensen reports, and so I think that raises an issue not only of reliability but also of credibility. Council of Europe, of course, has a corruption problem of its own and is going to need some time in order to regain its own credibility. And I think that this being the case, is it really up to any of us to regulate other organisations? We have of course, to support future reforms. That's what we should be doing. But the resolution and the report on FIFA is not something which helps us take a step towards reform. I will be rejecting it. On the other hand, I will be voting in favour of the Jensen report, as I think it will provide a very sound basis for future dialogue. Thank you very much. Mr. Edi from Norway now, please.
Monsieur Haïdé? Non?
Mr. Edi is not here, so we'll move on to Ms. Heinrich from Germany.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we are debating two excellent reports this morning. I somewhat regret the fact that I actually find myself talking to Anne Brasser's report. I'm actively involved as an official in a broad-based sports association, including football. Our best team plays in the local championship. Lots of our teams provide proof of the social benefits of team sport. We have lots of voluntary members, and Brasser's report is something which I can take back to my local club to explain to people what we actually do in the Council of Europe. Most of our members are aware of the corruption scandals regarding FIFA, for example. They're also aware of the talk about such major events. They're also aware of exploitation of workers in building major stadia. All football fans know all about that. And I must say they're not happy. And football fans view FIFA as a self-serving group of kleptocrats who benefit from impunity. So, of course, we've had all sorts of resolutions on this, but what use is that? Ms. Brasser, we have to look at the close links between sport, politics and money. clearly these same allegations apply at the level of national sport. I think with your report you touched on a very sensitive issue, and this was demonstrated once again by what the previous speaker said. It's true to say that the report we've heard about apparently is based on allegations and personal opinions. For a long time we've heard that the committee has been working hard to try to dig out facts in this never-ending story. FIFA wrote to us that they're willing to accept constructive criticism, even from bodies whose image has been tarnished by corruption scandals. So I have good news for FIFA. Ms. Brasseur's report is very positive, because she is one of the people who have always been digging hard to find out the facts here in the Council of Europe. So I think that the report is in excellent hands. The report picks up on the need for the governance structures of FIFA, governments and national associations to act, as many previous speakers have said. I do believe that this report provides us with an excellent framework for our work. And I think it would be wonderful for football fans if FIFA and other sport governance bodies would spend a bit less time setting up bank accounts in Panama and a bit more time dealing with fans of football and the values of the sport.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mrs. Huovinen from Finland. Sorry.
Dear colleagues, I would like to begin by thanking both rapporteurs on two comprehensive reports. My everyday life is full of football, as my son plays and my spouse follows. Both are very passionate about this sport. I myself have been active for several years in Finnish sport policy. Therefore, I have read both reports with great interest. It is easy to agree with Mr. Jensen's report that everyone's participation must be ensured in sports activities and governance. Particular attention should be paid to the involvement of women and young people. I personally hope that we could give more thought to the fact that also people with an immigrant background should be involved, and not just as athletes. In Finland, we have tried to find ways for increasing dialogue between the sports community and decision makers. For almost 100 years now, the National Sports Council has acted as an expert body in issues relating to sports. One of the main tasks of the Council is to assess the impact of sports in society in general. The Council collects, for instance, information on how many citizens, children and adults take part in sports activity regularly, and it makes assessments of how transparency and gender equality is taken account, and it deals also with ethical issues. As noted in the report, we need more international fora where decision makers from different countries can discuss all aspects of sports governance and integrity issues. These should also include difficult topics such as doping, grey zones of finances, racism, hate speech, match fixing and lack of transparency. We are used to see sport as an independent activity. However, when activities are financially supported by governments, the citizens have the right to demand openness, good governance and accountability. For me, sports should connect people from different national, economic, religious and cultural backgrounds. Sports can enable different people to meet each other and strengthen mutual understanding, and this way promote solidarity, diversity and ultimately human rights. Fair play should not only be words, but guiding principle of all decisions and activities. And as Madame Brasseur states in her report, we have a special responsibility when it comes to activities for children and young people in sports. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole à Madame.
Thank you very much. I now call Ms. Pina from Romania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues,
Le micro, pardon. Voilà.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to speak to you today on this engaging topic. I believe we have to approach football governance from two different perspectives. Firstly, I'm happy we have begun talking frankly about that which affected the industry for quite a long time. Of course, I'm talking about corruption. As a representative of a party driven to expunge corruptions at all levels, I know firsthand what the negative effects of such acts are. Any act of corruption, small or large, has and will continue to tarnish the reputation of the football industry. If we do not act now, the sports may be ruined forever. To this extent, I salute the recommendations presented by our colleagues, Mr. Janssen and Ms. Brasseur. Both have made compelling arguments in their reports. Yes, we need to work towards creating a better, more robust legislative framework to expedite prosecutions. And yes, we need to set up an independent international observatory body tasked with monitoring aspects regarding the governance of football organizations and other sports bodies. Secondly, we have to think in terms of how football can promote tolerance, social responsibility, deliver education programs and information campaigns to fight sexual harassment and gender discrimination. To give this more context, let's take a step back and talk about an unfortunate constant that has been present in the lives of many women and children: domestic violence. There are numerous cases of domestic violence, especially in the poorer communities, and the perpetrators continue to be predominantly men. Men, however, also represent the majority audience of football. I believe that football can make a difference in the lives of these people because football reaches out to them in a way that traditional institutional means cannot. Football touches millions of lives. Football players are seen as role models. I was reminded recently of an initiative started last year, backed by 61 female MEPs, endorsed by the European Commission and by our own Secretary General, Mr. Torbjörn Jagland, to combat violence against women through football. Through this initiative, UEFA was asked to broadcast 3 times at every UEFA and national game a 16-second video showing famous player and a black screen without sound displaying "Stop Violence Against Women." Try to imagine the impact of this campaign on the lives of young men across Europe and the rest of the world. That is why today, in front of this Assembly, I call upon all members to rally behind this initiative. Let us make our voice and those of millions across Europe heard. All we need is 3 times 15 seconds to spread the message and stop violence against women. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Gonzalez from Portugal.
Madam
President, dear colleagues, in turn, I would like to congratulate the rapporteurs on these issues of great importance, and they're very topical too. With the passage of time, new concerns have come to light with respect to the phenomenon of sport. Sport as we knew it has partially disappeared and has opened up to major economic and financial institutions. Sport influences sectors such as the media and medicine, and disturbing excesses have emerged. For example, doping, non-respect for the rights of athletes, discrimination, racism, and even political aspects. The values one identifies with sport are part and parcel of the heritage of our societies. Sports people are exemplars, icons, and examples. And in this regard, sport generates great passions amongst the population, especially football. Regrettably, this image of sport, in terms of sport being a school of life, is today besmirched. Sports news are often dominated by scandals, corruption, corruption, and all too often acts which go unpunished. Public opinion views sport as a milieu with too much money, with many interests mixed up, and the general feeling is that there is a lack of transparency in sport which we can no longer tolerate or accept. This new reality has not always been tracked by lawmakers, be it on the national level or in international institutions, in defending sporting transparency. Thus, the two draft texts we are discussing today go in the right direction of transparency. Both call for good and new governance. They advocate change and far-reaching reforms in a sector which generates extraordinary revenues and which is becoming a decisive and strategic player in the economic world and in the political world as well. Today we face a huge challenge, that of guaranteeing the values of sport and ethics in a world in which sport is gaining ground, including ground to which it doesn't really belong. And thus we need new sporting governance tailored to the new realities, with new players and institutions which can reform themselves in order to guarantee a future for sport which respects ethics, human rights and solidarity. But these proposals will only be positive, colleagues, if there is the involvement of all of us, parliamentarians in our respective countries. I come from a country, Portugal, which is passionate about sport, and especially football. A country which has adopted new legislation, which I think is an important step in defending the values of ethics, fairness and sporting truth. It's just a first step, but it is an important step which we should all follow in our respective countries. Dear colleagues, we must revert to the true values of sport. Thank you. I give the floor to Ms. Christoffersen from Norway.
Thank you, Mrs. President. Norway is a small country with 5 million inhabitants. Nevertheless, our Confederation of Sports consists of more than 2 million memberships. It's the largest children and youth organisation in Norway, and as such an important arena for social integration and public health. In Norway, the sports organisations were the very first democratic mass movements founded in 1861, based mainly on volunteer work from thousands of people. That is still the situation, even in branches where business and big money play a major role. Every sports event, local as well as national or international, depends on a large number of volunteers as organisers and board members. The same goes for the daily operation of 12,000 local sport clubs, whom in turn are the prerequisites for participation in sport on all levels. At the end of the day, the undermining of sport ethics is a threat to democracy itself. Another fact is that Sunday league and top league sports are closely interlinked. That is why the two reports are so extremely important. We associate athletes with a long list of positive values like fair play, healthy role models and impressive achievements. They are national heroes. For every new cheater, for every new incident of corruption, we lose a part of our admiration and confidence. Sport administrators should never forget their dependency of public trust and public money. And even more important, bad governance at top organisational levels demonstrate a lack of awareness of and respect for each and one of the volunteers, which sports on all levels are completely dependent on. That goes for every sport branch. Nevertheless, the International Football Federation, FIFA, with its 211 member states, has a special obligation to stay clean, representing the world's most popular sport, both in terms of number of performers, supporters, and maybe also sponsors and the amount of money involved. It should be noted, however, that there are positive initiatives as well. The reform process within FIFA itself, which includes a focus on gender equality. This could hopefully also lead to a stronger focus on women's football at all levels. Worth noting is also the agreement on a partnership between FIFA and the Council of Europe and on how to better promote human rights in sports based on the existing conventions against doping, match fixing and violence. If successful, This cooperation, together with the measures proposed in the reports of Madame Brasseur and Mr. Jensen, which includes a new convention on good governance in sport, could set renewed standards for all sports branches. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The final speaker is Mr. Kahn from France.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, I'd like to pay tribute to the work of our rapporteurs, Ms. Brasseur and Mr. Jensen, and I certainly subscribe to the draft resolutions and recommendations that they've put forward. They're ambitious, far-reaching. I, of course, share their views on the need for sport to be inclusive and its governance transparent, but we know, unfortunately, that the reality looks very different. And sport, including at an Olympic level, is very often marred by many a scandal. France hasn't remained inactive. A recent law adopted in 2017 seeks to uphold the ethics of sport, strengthening regulation, transparency of professional sport, and to enhance clubs' competitivity. When it comes to the management of professional federations and leagues, this law ensures the preservation of ethics in sport by making it compulsory to adopt a charter of ethics, a code of conduct, the implementation of which is going to be overseen by an independent committee specially set up to that end. With a view to transparency, there are a number of provisions within the law on preventing conflict of interest. The law also seeks to beef up rules on financial flows, admissive legal and financial control over associations, sports associations and clubs has been stepped up, and also the activities of sports agents, plans to buy, sell sports clubs, change in shareholder structures, all that will be better control. More generally, as far as professional sports and federations and leagues are concerned, the state will concentrate activities on coordination, monitoring and ethical standards. We need to modernise the governance modes of sports federations. I think the involvement of public authorities and development of sport is necessary, given the values of which sport is a vehicle, given its territorial dimension and its growing economic role. The support for sport covers a range of public policies, which it's why is indispensable to ensure that the public hand is visible. But when you're up against powerful federations and leagues, I think the absence of any sort of robust public player or partner with a clear roadmap is a weakness in terms of the harmonious development of sport. And I think erasing the role of the state is not a good thing. In November last, the French sports minister set up a steering group on sports governance. The aim is to rethink the organisation of sport in France, making sure it's more independent and clarifying the role of the state, local authorities, sports movements and private partners. Between now and next June, a certain number of proposals will be put forward so that we can establish a new institutional and organisational context or framework for sport so that we can develop the practice of sport throughout society.
Thank you very much. I now have to interrupt the list of speakers, and I will now call on the committee to reply. Ms. Brasseur, you have 5 minutes left, so I'll give the floor either to you or to Mr. Jensen. Mr. Jensen, you have 2 minutes remaining. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I think I can speak on behalf of both Anne and I to thank you all for what I would call overwhelming support for both our reports, both from the 6 political groups, but also, I think, almost everybody that has been speaking here in the Assembly. Thank you very much. On my own behalf, I can say that my report can seem rather technical in its nature when you go into it. But that's because, in fact, in the report, you have very concrete tools that can be used in practice now to come further in our work on establishing good governance in international sports. And that has also been acknowledged by a number of sports organisations who have reacted very positively to the different tools that we have been introducing. I would like also just to, even though it's Anne's report on FIFA, to say that, as you've seen, there's been a meeting with the Secretary General and FIFA on how to cooperate on international conventions. And I had the opportunity on Monday to say to the Secretary-General that we, of course, expect that the signals from our reports, the demands, the wishes for FIFA to work with us on our agenda, on our reports, is expected to be a part of this discussion with FIFA. And also the Secretary-General said that this would be the case. Then I would just simply thank all the people who have been helping producing my report, Jens Sei Andersen from Play the Game, Andreas Silje as an expert from Norway, Antonio Di Marco, who carried out my addendum, our Deputy Secretary General, Gabriella Batani-Dragoni, and also the Executive Secretary of EPAS, Dan Frossard, who is following these negotiations, and also my President of the Danish National Federation of Sports, Mr. Niels Nygaard, I would like to thank, and of course the Secretariat, my co-worker on this, Ivitrin Odrats, who have done immensely big work. So thank you very much. Looking forward now for completing our task with voting on the reports. And thank to you, Anne. We are a good couple doing this stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brasser, you have 5 minutes remaining. Thank you very much, Madam President. I should like to echo the thanks extended by my colleague Mogens Jensen, and also thank all of those involved in drawing up my report, so both people within this organization as well as people from the outside. Now, I've listed them in my report, so I'm not going to repeat their names here, but I should also like to second the thanks to colleagues here today. 24 speakers took the floor, 6 on behalf of the political groups, and the 18 individual speakers have all supported what we're trying to do. Now, there were certain aspects that I wasn't able to address either in my introduction nor in the written memorandum. So there are a number of points that I'd like to single out here. First of all, women's football, women's sport in general. It's something, I think, which is extremely important, and we've certainly been able to see some advances recently. Now, I've been out and I've met the football players themselves. They really are extraordinary. They are terrific. And they're there as the standard bearers of values, not only for all of us, for football, but also for the values that we need in our societies. Also, going to call on the leaders of sports organizations to ensure they promote more women to their ranks, and we need to make sure that our national associations also see to it that there is proper representation of women, balanced representation. Now, one of the speakers made reference to the supporters, and you certainly have to mention them, because, I mean, football would be nothing without them, so we have to pay tribute to them. We have to show our gratitude towards them, and it is thanks to their passion that football exists, and that's why football should not abuse them and should not be taking advantage of them just to make money. I mean, I haven't got anything against money per se, but certainly we've seen all kinds of abuses and excesses in the world of football. Now, just a word about development. One of our French members earlier on was saying that more needed to be done to have better physical education and sports education, and perhaps you could have a levy on football transfers to spend on physical education. I think more should be spent on sports, and there's a passage in my report which talks about helping football organizations, and I say that that should be linked to education as well as to vocational training for young people, because we're only going to get anywhere if we do more than train young people to play football, because only a handful will be able to make a living from it. The others in the football academies have to be given proper vocational training so as to allow them to earn their livelihoods outside football. So we have to, of course, help them make a contribution to developing their countries. Perhaps just a final word, Madam President, about what our colleague Mr. Müller said, and he has echoed the reproaches that were directed at me by FIFA. Now, he is alleging that my report is based on rumours. Now, I can tell you that I have read what FIFA has written extremely carefully, and nowhere has FIFA said that I have made any mistakes or errors. I mean, of course, I take full responsibility for my report, and when I use words such as in my view, I think, well, of course I'm allowed to surmise or assume certain things because these are issues of perception or perception. And I've talked to people at FIFA, to Mr. Infantino and Ms. Samura, and of course they know that they can reform the organisation, and you have many of those reforms set out in Mr. Jensen's report, and a lot of them are in the pipeline, but they do need to be implemented in practice, and we need to look not only at their application but also at the mindset. You've got to be in the right frame of mind, a willingness to implement reforms, and I think, you know, there's the rub. That's where you have a problem. So you've got an ethics committee, 15 people. So how can you claim that progress is being made when the president of the governance committee is replaced because he dared to say that Mr. Muko, the vice president of the Russian government, could not be a member of the council, in other words, of the executive committee. So talking about Mr. Mutko. So, you know, removed from his post for saying that. And, you know, that is where you then have a problem with credibility. And this is the message that I was trying to get across to FIFA. I'm sorry to say that they failed to heed that message. I mean, certainly FIFA didn't want to hear it, but most colleagues here support both Mr. Jensen's report as well as my own, along with the accompanying draft resolution, for which I am very grateful, much obliged to you for all your support, because football certainly needs all our backing if we are to preserve what is a fabulous sport. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Santana, would you like to add anything?
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, it's possible that there is bootletment, if not an audience, but our interest in sport governance. Sport in general and football in particular are key factors of the social fabric and their powerful tools to promote universal values. If our goal here is to help build a better society, it's clear that we cannot overlook the role of sport. We need the sport to fulfill its key role effectively, and we want sport to be credible in the message it delivers. But for this not to happen, all key sport actors must explicitly adhere to, and their behaviour must be firmly based on the core values such as human rights and the rule of law, democracy and concern for the common good. Sport itself is a common good and is not the kingdom of the sport dignitaries. Thus, welcome or not, we will continue to stress that we believe should be improved, and this is not to give lessons, as we know well that politics face the same problem and that we as politicians have failed many times to give the right example. Our Assembly has an important role to play in fostering improved sport governance. I attach particular importance to the many proposals in the two reports that call for closest partnership, including between the Assembly and those that we consider our partners. The two resolutions that our committee are presenting today to the Assembly include concrete, innovative proposals that could really lead the way to significant change, including the world culture of sport governance. Many people are looking at the decision we make today, believing that we can really make a difference with our vote for the future of sport governance. We shall not disappoint them. This is why I warmly ask all of you to support this third resolution, and not only here and now, but also in your own countries. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. La discussion est
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate. I will remind you that the election of the Commission of Human Rights is still open. Those who have not yet voted may do so by going to the area behind the President's chair. You've got until 1 o'clock, and the session will resume, of course, between 3:30 and 5. We now move on to the resolution presented by the Culture Committee, working towards a framework for modern sports government, to which 8 amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation to which 3 amendments have been tabled. Now we're going to be taking the resolution first of all, and I gather that the committee wishes to propose that amendments 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 5, 6 and 1, which were unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Madam Chair, is that the case? Are there any objections? No. There are no objections. Therefore, amendments 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 5, 6 and 1 to the draft resolution are declared as agreed. Which means we will now vote on the draft resolution and its addendum. So the vote is now open. Resolution document 14464. The vote is closed. Could we please have the result on the screens? The draft resolution contained in document 14464 is adopted. We now move on to looking at the draft recommendation. Again, I gather that the chair of the Culture Committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that it consider amendments 7, 8 and 9 as agreed, since they were unanimously approved. Is that the case? Is that right? Are there any objections? No, apparently not. In that case, amendments 7, 8 and 9 to the draft recommendation have been duly agreed. We now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation in document 14464, and I remind you that a 2/3 majority is required. 2/3 majority of votes cast. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
Je demande l'affichage. Could we have the result, please?
Le projet de recommandation
the draft recommendation in document 14464 is adopted because it has a 2/3 majority. We move now on to the second report on good football governance. The Culture Committee has presented a draft resolution to which 3 amendments have been tabled. Again, the chair of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 2 and 3 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed. Any objections? No. That means that amendments 1, 2 and 3 to the draft resolution are agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 14452. The vote is open. The vote is closed. We have the result on the screens, please. The draft resolution in document 14452 is adopted. Thank you very much. I just remind you that the ballot to elect the Council of Commission on Human Rights is underway. You may vote by going to the area behind the President's chair, and you have until 1 o'clock to cast your vote, and the vote will be resumed between 3:30 and 5 p.m. this afternoon.
Monsieur le Président de l'Arménie.
President of Armenia.
Mr. President, it is a true honor and a real pleasure to welcome you in this chamber. The Council of Europe is an organization of 47 European states, and our Parliamentary Assembly is and remains a pan-European platform for political dialogue where the views and aspirations of the leaders of all our member states should be represented. Therefore, your visit today is very important for us. Mr. President, you visited Strasbourg in October 2013 when Armenia was chairing the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe and when you had just started the first year of your second presidential mandate. You shared with us at that time a clear and ambitious political program aimed at consolidating and strengthening further Armenia's democratic institutions. A lot of progress has been made since, and this morning we had an opportunity to discuss together the numerous steps your authorities have taken, including the constitutional and electoral reform, as well as the strengthening of the independence of the judiciary and the stepping up of the fight against corruption. The political transition to a new parliamentary political system has now been almost complete, but a number of reform issues still remain on the table, and I would like to assure you, Mr. President, of the Council of Europe's and our Assembly's full support on this front. Mr. President, you are well aware of the challenges that Council of Europe faces today. I strongly believe that this can be effectively overcome only if all Member States and all Council of Europe institutions and stakeholders reaffirm their commitment to the ideals of European unity and to the values and principles of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. From our discussion this morning, I know that Armenia's commitment to these ideals and principles is strong. Therefore, we are looking forward to hearing your views. Mr. President, thank you for being here. You have the floor.
Honorable President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Honorable Secretary General, distinguished members of the Assembly. At the outset, I would like to warmly greet you and congratulate you, distinguished Mr. Nicoletti, on assuming the high office of the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. You have indeed embarked upon this mission in rather challenging times. I strongly believe that your extensive experience and are exactly what is needed for the future success and reputation of our organization. I also wish to commend Mrs. Kyriakidis for her excellent performance in the capacity of President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The last time I had the honor to speak from this high podium was in 2013 when Armenia held the chairmanship in the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. That mission served as a key landmark in our integration within the larger family of the Council of Europe. I trust we met the expectations while carrying out that mission. Tomorrow is January 25, the day on which we acceded to the Council of Europe exactly 17 years ago. At the time of joining this Europe-wide structure, we were fully aware of the path that lay ahead of us. We were also fully aware that building and strengthening democracy would not be easy without the support and direct involvement of the Council of Europe structures. Indeed, through political will and joint constructive engagement, we managed to overcome numerous obstacles and to achieve profound improvements. As I stand before this Assembly today, I can proudly state that we have honored the main commitments assumed vis-à-vis the Council of Europe in terms of Armenia's democratization. Moreover, this is not just our assertion. Our achievements in consolidating democratic institutions have been recognized by the monitoring reports of the Council of Europe bodies. We firmly continue the efforts of joining the Europe-wide legal framework. The number of conventions Armenia has already signed up is close to 70. For us, this process is not simply about honoring the commitments that we undertook. In doing so, we are primarily implementing our own credo and our own convictions. We shall continue in that same vein. Moreover, our country's progress on the path of reforms will get a new momentum and accelerate in April, when the amendments adopted under the reformed constitution will enter into force, and we will embark upon the implementation of activities envisaged by our comprehensive and intense partnership agreement with the EU. Any democracy is a living organism. Throughout our quarter-century-long efforts in state building, we aimed at nourishing this organism. We have been fully conscious that democracy constantly requires attention, review, and advancement. It cannot afford a standstill and must keep up with the rapidly changing times in order to remain viable. Along the lines of this logic, we undertook constitutional reform in Armenia, which received wide-ranging support of the Council of Europe. In April, with the clear commitment to the pillars of the Council of the best to the parliamentary system of government, and throughout this period I have announced it from this high podium.
Since succeeding to the Council of Europe, dear ladies and gentlemen, our country has heard the criticism and encouragements of the Council of Europe. I have no doubt that both have contributed strongly to Armenia's progress. This whole time we have cooperated closely with the Venice Commission, and based on the expert opinion of the Venice Commission, we refined the constitutional reforms package. In an atmosphere of mutual trust, this efficient engagement continues to date through a process of implementing numerous new legislative solutions under the reformed constitution. This was best manifested in deliberations of Armenia's new electoral code, which resulted in the adoption of the code in a transparent and inclusive process with the participation of the various political actors across the board. We opted for something unprecedented. For the first time in history, we published the signed lists of voters after the election. As you know, this practice is not common, especially in light of personal data protection concerns. However, we decided, and we did so in order to achieve greater public trust in the elections. The new electoral code clearly proved its viability in the 2017 April parliamentary election. This election was observed by a large number of invited observation missions, including a delegation of this assembly. It is important to underline that the new electoral code also resulted in allocation in the National Assembly of a certain number of seats, which are exclusively for representation of the national minorities. This is yet another step towards more participatory and inclusive governance. We're currently reforming our judicial, criminal and criminal procedure codes, as well as the Referendum Act and the law on the Constitutional Court. We are well aware that the rule of law can be safeguarded only by having an effective, independent and corruption risk-free judiciary. In this context, we highly appreciate the important role of the European Court of Human Rights, the jurisprudence of which plays an essential role in enhancing the quality of justice in our country. Based on the jurisprudence of the European Court, we have implemented a number of legislative reforms and we have improved the legal practices. These are important steps for consolidation of the human rights protection in our country. These efforts have not gone unnoticed. The Republic of Armenia is a leader among the Council of Europe member states in terms of proper and consistent implementation of the judgments of the European Court. We are convinced that proper protection of human rights and consolidation of democratic values cannot be effective without a relentless fight against corruption. The fight against corruption must be prioritized at all social and political layers. Armenia is contemplating a qualitatively new toolkit in this respect. In mid-2017, the Armenian Parliament unanimously adopted a number of laws that create a first-ever national entity for the prevention of corruption in line with all international standards. The entity will become effective in 2018 and the Parliament will elect its members. The anti-corruption package also resulted in the adoption of a law on whistleblowing and the protection of whistleblowers. We have also criminalized illicit enrichment. We are determined and committed to continuing our systemic and persistent everyday efforts towards eliminating the evil of corruption.
Distinguished members of the Assembly, since accession to the Council of Europe, our country has borne profound responsibility for honoring our obligations and respecting our collective commitment to the fundamental values of this organization. However, in recent years, we have witnessed an unfortunate and unprecedented crisis of values in this organization. Through their irresponsible conduct, to say the least, some MPs have acted contrary to the core mission of the Council of Europe and inflicted heavy blow upon the organization's reputation. The greater family of the Council of Europe thus faced perhaps the most serious challenge since its foundation, as cases of bribing assembly members and resulting dishonest voting were exposed. Since 2014, a number of politically biased and egregious reports and resolutions triggered a sharp change in the attitudes of Armenian society towards this assembly. However, these revelations justify the hopes that such corrupt practices are short-lived. Eventually, they will rise to the surface, stamping out resolutions thus adopted and discrediting the individuals and powers that back them. I am convinced that the report of the independent inquiry body looking into the exposed instances of corruption will eradicate those defective practices and help to strengthen the member states' trust in our organization. Ladies and gentlemen, upon accession to the Council of Europe, Armenia also undertook a commitment to pursue efforts to settle the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict by peaceful means only, and to use its influence over Artsakh to foster the solution to the conflict. Although the Council of Europe is not a conflict resolution platform, I believe it is appropriate to briefly touch upon the issue in light of our aforementioned commitment. Exactly 30 years ago, on the surface, everything could possibly seem calm and peaceful in Artsakh. However, the surface image was deceiving. We had never put up with Stalin's decision to annex Artsakh to Azerbaijan. Throughout all those years, the people of Artsakh were extremely anxious because the Baku authorities did their best to drive Armenians out of their historical cradle. According to the 1926 census, Armenians accounted for over 90% of Artsakh's population. As a consequence of the Baku policies, the percentage had declined to just 77% of the population by 1988. I myself was among the Artsakhtsis that were worried about these developments. In February 1988, the Artsakhtsis rose against the Baku policies and tried to exercise by peaceful means the Artsakh people's right to self-determination. I was at the forefront of the uprising. The Parliament of Artsakh took the decision and people went out for peaceful rallies. Azerbaijan's reaction was not simply a negative one. Azerbaijan's reaction was the massacre of Armenians living in the town of Sumgait, hundreds of kilometers away from Artsakh. It was an act of revenge against Armenians for the decision adopted by Artsakh. One side of the scale had the parliament's decision and peaceful demonstration, and the other had violence and massacres. Everyone who needs to deal with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict resolution must clearly comprehend this fact. Hence, all attempts to put the parties of the conflict on equal footing are inherently futile. Such an equation is nothing but false impartiality. It is an equality sign between the perpetrators of the Sumgait massacre and its victims. On February 27, we shall commemorate the victims of the Sumgait massacre. The massacres went on to become the state policy as Azerbaijan unleashed a war aimed at the complete annihilation of the Armenian population of Artsakh. Given the deficit of justice and the threat of extermination, Artsakh had no other choice but to resort to self-defense. Yet again, I was at the forefront, and I have never had the slightest regret about the choice I made then. The time is ripe for the resolution of this conflict. It requires strict respect for the established ceasefire regime and honoring all the agreements reached in the past. Settlement must be peaceful and overcome the deficit of justice. No matter where I find myself, I will always be at the forefront for this matter as well. The parties shall assume joint responsibility for the peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and find a compromise, a middle ground settlement. The negotiation process under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs is the only internationally agreed format for the resolution of this conflict. The international community, including Council of Europe, has reiterated its support to this format on numerous occasions. The commitment undertaken by Armenia and Azerbaijan requires a joint and concerted effort of all the parties to the conflict. However, Azerbaijan is obviously not ready for that. The aggression that Azerbaijan unleashed against Artsakh in April 2016 was characterized by egregious violations of the international humanitarian law against the peaceful civilians and prisoners of war. It struck a heavy blow upon the negotiation process by reawakening dreadful memories of the Sumgait massacres. Unfortunately, this assembly has at times allowed developments that turned a blind eye to the aforementioned facts, watering the mill of those who are not interested in peaceful settlement of the conflict. I call upon all the members of this assembly to apprehend the potential negative consequences of a careless or a biased language for the fragile security and in Artsakh. Facing a permanent threat of war, Artsakh continues to build democracy and promote respect for human rights. In all of these initiatives, Armenia will provide full support to Artsakh. Armenia will tenaciously defend the rights and interests of Artsakh and help to strengthen Artsakh's security. As the Secretary General of the Council of Europe has rightly noted, there must be no grey zones in Europe when it comes to the protection of human rights. I hope that in the not-too-distant future, this organization too will stand by the side Artsakh with all of its expertise. A person living in Artsakh deserves it. The people of Artsakh have long earned this right. The protection of human rights is a priority for the Artsakh government. As to the fundamental documents of the Council of Europe, Artsakh unilaterally subscribed to the European Convention of Human Rights and undertook to implement it fully. Commendably, Nagorno-Karabakh has achieved all of this on its own, without tangible support from any international organization. It proves once again that in Artsakh, respect for and protection of human rights are not mere words, but a conscious and determined choice. Artsakh cannot stay out of the international processes, simply because Azerbaijan is opposed to it. The authorities of Azerbaijan commit flagrant violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms, not least the criminal prosecution of opposition figures and even their abduction from the territory of another country. This brings me back to the work of the European Court of Human Rights. The ECHR has examined applications by Azerbaijani citizens that are also related to the resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. I understand that the ECHR takes up this issue with the sole purpose of precluding grey areas and safeguarding human rights throughout Europe. Nevertheless, political language and assessments in the decisions of the CHR can have direct negative impact on the negotiation process. Therefore, it is necessary for the CHR to exercise extreme caution in its assessments and avoid any political language. Distinguished members of the Assembly, our national economies are more vulnerable than ever in the face of the present-day global challenges. As a result, welfare and prosperity are at the center of the public attention. The challenging realities in our region, in their turn, undermine the economic growth potential. Therefore, we aspire to make the best use of all available resources, including the opportunities availed to us by integration structures. 5 years ago, in 2013, shortly after Armenia's decision to accede to the Eurasian Economic Union, many people, including a number of them in this assembly, expressed skepticism towards Armenia. However, Armenia proved her ability to combine engagement in different integration structures and even to serve as a role model for cooperation. On this day, 2 months ago, on November 24, on the margins of the Eastern Partnership Summit in Brussels, Armenia and the European Union concluded a comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement, which contemplates a completely new quality of engagement. Armenia's fully fledged integration in the Eurasian Economic Union was not an obstacle for that matter in any way or shape. Today, we actively continue to extend our international engagement in various other directions. The Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie is a case in point. That is, for us, a unique platform of engagement in terms of both language and culture and promotion of human rights. Armenia will have the honor to host the 17th summit of La Francophonie in October 2018 in Yerevan. The motto of the summit will be Vivre ensemble, living together, and a pact with the same name will be adopted for strengthening human rights and intercultural and interreligious dialogue. For us, it is not simply a motto. The Armenian nation knows the price of hate speech, intolerance and discrimination, and we fight against these practices on all possible platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, next year we will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the Council of Europe. It is a crucial landmark for our greater family, which has been fighting for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Europe for almost 7 decades. An organization created by only 10 states, it now unites 47 states of the European family with a population of 820 million. I consider this to be an enormous achievement that should be cherished. No effort should be spared in building a positive agenda and further enhancing the role and significance of this organization. The mission of the Council of Europe, however, extends beyond that. The organization has a great role to play in political as well as civilizational terms. I believe that the organization needs a further stimulus in redefining its role and significance in Europe-wide political agriculture. The contemporary mechanism and arrangements are truly wanted by our societies in order to increase this organization's effectiveness. For quite some time now, we are closely following and keep at the center of our attention the commendable process of reforms initiated in the Council of Europe. Armenia supports the idea of convening a fourth summit of the heads of state and governments of the Council of Europe. I believe it will be a good opportunity for identifying the most pressing problems and issues of our continent and revisiting the vision of a stronger and more inclusive Europe. I am confident that the founders of the Council of Europe should have been very proud about the fact of uniting 47 countries of Europe under one roof. This is an achievement, the importance of which should not be underestimated. This unity needs continuous support from all of us. Armenia stands ready for the persistent journey towards a more mature form of engagement and cooperation. Armenia stands ready to contribute by all means at its disposal to the success of the Council of Europe, our shared home of democracy and the rule of law. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sargsyan, for your interesting address. Members of the Assembly have questions to put to you. I remind them that questions must be limited to 30 seconds and no more. Colleagues should be asking questions and not making speeches. I first call Mrs. Kau, Norway, on behalf of the EPP Group.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. President, for visiting the Council. Mr. President, 10 years term of your presidency comes to the end. Summarizing these years, could you please indicate the major achievement of Armenia in its European agenda, having in mind the recent agreement signed between Armenia and EU that you mentioned in your speech? Thank you.
I thank you. If you mean the European agenda of Armenia, I shall note that in the course of the past 10 years, Armenia has registered serious achievements, both on the bilateral track with the European nations, as well as in the multilateral setting. As I mentioned, both in the years 2016 and 2017, the Committee of Ministers and Parliamentary Assembly co-rapporteurs in their reports recognized the progress made by Armenia. Not to speak too long, I just would illustrate it with one example. In the year 2008, when I got elected to the post of the President of the Republic of Armenia, we were facing serious challenges, and the relations was tense with the Council of Europe, and even the threat of sanctions was heard. And 10 years later, now we're talking about the achievements of Armenia. As regards the relations with the European Union of ours, as I mentioned, just 2 months ago, on November 24th, we concluded with the European Union new comprehensive agreement with European Union, which is opening large horizons for for Armenia. We consider ourselves Europeans, regardless of the fact whether Europeans consider us to be as such. Therefore, our cooperation with European nations and European structures stems from our conviction, and nobody is imposing it upon us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now the second question, Mrs. Doris Barnett from Germany, Socialist Group.
Thank you very much, President. Talks with representatives of your country as well as Azerbaijan have shown that both sides would like to see an end to the conflict which has been dragging on for the last 26 years, and the whole package and individual steps do not diverge too much from one another. Now, we stand for dialogue and reconciliation. What can we do to assist you, the President, as well as the Parliament of Armenia, to try and resolve a conflict, to spare people further suffering, and also to guarantee a rosier future?
Thank you very much for that. Indeed, the Azerbaijanis would like, and we would like this conflict to end as soon as possible. But the problem is that there's a huge difference between those two desires. You ask what you can do, you ask what the international community can do. I believe that the main obstacle to the negotiation is Azerbaijan's maximalist and unrealistic set of expectations vis-à-vis the outcome of the negotiation. If the international community could help Azerbaijan to rid itself of the illusions and to arrive at a realistic juncture, I think in a short time we could achieve great success. Indeed, this conflict is an obstacle to the development of our nations. It takes away human lives. It inflicts great financial loss and material loss, and there's truly a need for this conflict to be resolved. You see, the negotiations are also hindered by the unfortunate fact that the achieved agreements are not carried out. As you know, in 2016, Azerbaijan unleashed a large-scale military operation with the aim of returning Nagorno-Karabakh into Azerbaijan by use of force. Since then, we had meetings in Vienna, St. Petersburg, followed by meetings in Geneva, and in the course of these meetings, in the first two at least, officials, high-level officials were represented, mediators from the co-chair countries were there, and we agreed that the best way to continue the negotiation is to build some elements of trust. And in that sense, we decided to create a mechanism, an international mechanism to investigate violations of the ceasefire and in some way to broaden, to widen the mandate of the personal representative of the OSCE chairmanship in office and to give the personal representative additional tools for de-escalation. Unfortunately, though, that did not materialize because immediately after those meetings, Azerbaijan's highest officials uttered statements whereby they said that these were not their words, these were the words of the co-chairs, and that the Nagorno-Karabakh issue is a domestic matter of Azerbaijan. Under those circumstances, to anticipate a swift resolution or intensive progress in the negotiation would be unrealistic. Turning to your question, I would like to say that our appeal to all of us is to get the parties to be realistic.
Thank you. Next question from Mr. Türkes from Turkey, European Conservative.
Mr. President, though there was a protocol between Armenia and Turkey, I recall it being not in anyone's agenda. Does this mean that the stagnation in Armenian-Turkish relations will continue in the foreseeable future? Is it possible for Armenia to act in any way that will show its intentions to normalize its relations in the region after the presidential elections in your country in March?
You see, we don't really understand well the demand of the Turkish side to do something. In 2008, after I got elected, I initiated publicizing the Armenian-Turkish talks, the result of which was a set of meetings between me and the President of Turkey. The negotiations continued intensively, and in Switzerland, in the presence of the foreign affairs ministers, of permanent members of the UN Security Council, we signed two documents on the establishment of relations between Armenia and Turkey. Before the launch of the negotiations, those documents very clearly stated, and they still do state, that these relations are to be established without any preconditions. But unfortunately, after signing the protocols, the Turkish side has constantly tried. To date, it is in fact trying to come up with preconditions. In the international experience, we have not come across similar examples. All terms are negotiated before a deal is signed. After a document is signed, basic morality requires complying with the requirements of a document. 9 years down the road, we keep hearing again from the Turkish side about the need to allegedly take some steps. Should the establishment of relations between countries require some gestures, some concessions? The document very clearly states that relations are to be established, after which all of the existing wrinkles between the two countries should be discussed. But the Turkish side, let me reiterate, is coming up with preconditions. We never can accept any preconditions. Turkey is a powerful state. Indeed, Turkey has enormous potential, and Armenia's potential is not to be compared with that of Turkey. But this is not to mean that Turkey should speak from a position of power or in the language of preconditions. If that were the case, countries much more powerful than Turkey are out there in terms of their population and economy, and then those powerful states would speak with Turkey from a position of power or in the language of preconditions. And I think the Turkish authorities and the Turkish people would never accept such an attitude. We, similarly, do not accept such an attitude. It would simply be highly desirable, irrespective of the fact that these protocols will, in the near future, sometime before the spring, be voided by Armenia because they are pointless. I believe it would be appropriate, it would be correct for the Turkish side, for maintaining fragile stability in the region, to give up on its biased position of unequivocal support for Azerbaijan. I would like to remind you that during the hostilities in 2016, Turkey was the only country in the world that expressed support for the military action. In 4 days, Turkey's president and prime minister combined issued 5 statements in support of and in defense of Azerbaijan. What can we do under these circumstances? It would be an insult for our people to make one-sided concessions for establishing relations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mrs. Rodriguez Hernandez from Spain, ALDE Group.
President, going beyond theory and talking about the association agreement between Europe and Armenia, what key measures have been taken so far in combating corruption, violence and crime, and also against terrorism? And talking about this current agreement, which we think will be more ambitious, what's the difference between this and the previous one? What are the key elements which are more ambitious, and what elements are there in this agreement which will make it a reality and more ambitious? Thank you.
In my speech, I addressed the efforts that we have carried out in Armenia towards eradicating corruption. And I want to say that, unfortunately, our efforts have not borne too great results. This despicable phenomenon exists in Armenia, among other countries. As I said last year, we enacted a law whereby we created a corruption prevention commission. This legislation is fully in line with the European best standards. Members of the commission are to be elected by the Armenian parliament after April 9, once the amended constitution provisions come into full force. As I said, we adopted a law on whistleblowing and the protection of whistleblowers. We have criminalized illicit enrichment. And if my memory is not failing, close to 500 Armenian officials will be required to submit declarations of their assets and income. For a country as small as Armenia, that is a huge number. There is vibrant civil society in Armenia, and civil society in turn is making a contribution to exposing and solving these crimes, as well as to their prevention. Turning now to punishment. Every year, the number of criminal cases initiated and the number of judgments pronounced multiplies several-fold, and these are judgments for corruption offenses. Now, if you're asking me about general crime and criminality, I must say in 2017, the grave crime rate in Armenia was reduced by about 20%, and this includes crimes like murder, this includes other grave crimes, and the law enforcement system of Armenia is indeed intensely fighting criminality. Now, turning to your question about the differences between the agreement signed with the EU and its predecessor, there are many more opportunities in this agreement. We contemplated an action plan with the European Union, and the EU and the Council of Europe have been our supporters in the reform process through expert advice as well as technical assistance The current agreement, the SEPA, is a legal document that requires ratification by the Armenian parliament as well as by the national parliaments of 27 now member states of the European Union. Now, the SEPA, the Comprehensive and Enhanced Partnership Agreement, covers all walks of life and it's legally binding. We're confident that our cooperation with the EU will grow deeper because we cooperate with the European organizations not in order to show to anyone that we are cooperating, but because we consider ourselves bearers of the European value system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. Psychogios from Greece.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. President, what impact on the rule of law and the protection of human rights will the transition to a parliamentary system have? And second, what impact will the privatization and liberalization policies provided in the new constitution have, given that neoliberal policies, wherever applied, have led to increase of inequalities and violation of socio-economic rights? What countermeasures will the government take in this context? Thank you.
I believe that the transition to a parliamentary form of government is a logical next step in the reforms underway in Armenia. We're profoundly convinced that parliamentary government is more inclusive governance, it is more transparent governance, and it is more in line with the vision for consolidating democracy. I'm not sure if I got the second part of your question. So, we believe that the parliamentary form of government will help to develop democracy, human rights protection in our country. The parliamentary system of government will have a greater impact on civil society. The parliamentary form of government will enable greater accountability. The parliamentary government will enable closer cooperation with our European partners.
Thank you. Now the next question from Mr. Fournier, France, from the EPP group.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues,
President,
comment l'Arménie réussit-elle à concilier son appartenance au partenariat
is
oriental
Armenia going to reconcile its membership of the Eastern Partnership of the European Union with its membership of the Euro-Asian community? And what is the current state of relations between Armenia and Russia? Thank you very much.
Well, you see, I think we're already reconciling the two, and we have no doubt that by acceding in various integration structures, one can certainly move forward confidently. Since 2009, 2010, we have been negotiating with the European Union the signing of a new agreement. That period overlapped with our negotiations with the Eurasian Economic Union. Officials in the Eurasian Economic Union and officials in the European Union very clearly knew that we were having negotiations with both integrated structures. In the initial phase, both of them welcomed our position. But there came a time when our colleagues in the EU thought that these two, or membership in these two integration structures is irreconcilable. So we were forced to make a decision to join, to accede to the Eurasian Economic Union, because 1,000 strings attach Armenia's economy to the economies of the Eurasian Economic Union member states. We have many centuries of history. We have historical friendships, and the vast majority, up to 80% of Armenia's citizens, support the notion of closer cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union. But I must say, to the credit of EU officials, that much changed in the way of thinking over time. By the Riga summit of the Eastern Partnership, it was decided to have a tailored or differentiated approach. It was decided that it is truly possible to reconcile membership in the different integration structures. We then launched intensive talks, and as you see, we arrived at the right juncture. And on November 24, we signed an agreement with the EU as well. I believe that this reconciliation requires something very simple. One needs to be candid with one's partners and not to conceal the negotiation process and the undertakings. So if in one integration process you have commitments that do not contradict your commitments under another document, then why not reconcile? I believe that we have similar experience in the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, being a member of which we cooperate with NATO. This history dates back years, and I believe that in the future there will be close cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the EU. The future is all about that cooperation. The problems that currently exist, and may also emerge tomorrow, are no good for development. These problems are absorbing enormous resources that could be diverted to bettering life for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now the next question from Mr. Seydov, Azerbaijan, European Conservative.
That you were a leader of the war against Azerbaijan. Why you didn't mention about the Khojaly massacre, where kids, older people, women, approximately 800 have been killed by Armenians? Why you didn't mention about the ethnic cleansing, 100% in Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 surrounding regions? And now you try to mislead the international community. How can you organize your policy if you are not ready to implement neither this organization nor other organizations' resolutions? United Nations, Council of Europe, European Union and all international organizations said about the occupation of Azerbaijani territories, and you are not ready to accept no one from this organization. This is the Armenian way of integration.
Thank you.
No, I would like to first ask you to calm down and be cooler and not to misfigure my words. I did not announce here that I have been a war leader. I did not have that honor. I was a participant of the just struggle of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. Why did I not mention the incidents in Khojalu that you call a genocide? For the very simple reason that immediately after those painful events, Ayaz Mutalibov, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, in great detail, in a very much informed way, stated facts that clearly showed who actually organized and carried out those massacres. You know, I very much regret. Genocide is not a good thing. Carrying out genocide is not, or surviving a genocide is not an honor, it's a suffering. And I think there's a trend in Azerbaijan to have whatever the Armenians have had. This, you see, is impermissible. Why do you need to call something a genocide which never occurred, and it was never carried out by the Armenians in particular? As to the international organizations and our commitments assumed and the fulfillment of these commitments, you are just wrong. There is no international organization that would have adopted a decision that would have been rejected by Armenia. You tried to recall the UN Security Council resolutions. My advice to you would be, when you go into a topic, go into it, really, and study it. The world knows that the UN Security Council has never discussed the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. In 1993, the UN Security Council adopted 4 resolutions on stopping the hostilities in the Nagorno-Karabakh area. After each resolution, Azerbaijan came out and said it will not stop the fighting. It attempted new offensives, new attacks, but as usual, it suffered losses. In these 4 resolutions, the only commitment of Armenia was to use its reputation, its authority, and its influence to get the hostilities to stop. To the credit of the then government of Armenia, we honored these commitments, this one commitment. Number one who was responsible for it, Azerbaijan, who was responsible for stopping the hostilities, failed to stop the fighting. And as you know, in 1994, the ceasefire agreement was signed, but it was signed under the influence of other factors and not the UN Security Council resolution. But unfortunately, the provisions of that agreement, of the ceasefire agreement, are not being honored. And that ceasefire agreement very clearly states that the hostilities need to stop. And for political solution, an extensive process of talks must be launched. And as I said, in this process of negotiation, as your own words clearly illustrate, you want the most. You want what is impossible. You want to return into Azerbaijan, Karabakh. Unfortunately, xenophobia in Azerbaijan has gotten to the point, it has advanced so far that you're explicitly saying that you need Karabakh, but without the Armenians. That is impossible. It is never going to happen. The essence of the struggle of people of Nagorno-Karabakh is very simple. It is a struggle for liberty. It is a struggle for self-determination. And that struggle cannot have anything but a positive outcome. I am sure.
We must now conclude the questions to Mr. Sargsyan. On behalf of the Assembly, Mr. President, I thank you most warmly for your address and for the answers given to the questions. Now, in information, the ballot for electing the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights is now suspended until this afternoon's sitting, Voting will reopen at 3:30 and close at 5 p.m. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 with the agenda which was approved on Monday morning. The sitting is adjourned.